Just 3 days, that's how long many politicians thought Ukraine would survive after Russia launched its full-scale invasion 4 years ago. But despite daily missile and drone attacks and tens of thousands of casualties, the country is still standing, still resisting the relentless Russian onslaught. Alongside support from its allies, there is another crucial reason for that: Ukraine's early and heavy investment in artificial intelligence and robotics, helping compensate for its numerical disadvantage on the battlefield. Now, Germany wants to learn from Ukraine's frontline experience to modernize its own armed forces. That's why on To The Point we ask, the war in Ukraine, how is AI transforming the battlefield? Welcome to The Point. I'm Nicole Fröhlich in Berlin, and I'm pleased to introduce today's panel. I'm joined here in the studio by journalist and military expert Thomas Wiegold. DW reporter Roman Goncharenko is with us. He covers security policy across the post-Soviet space. And joining us via video link is Vanessa Voss. She's a doctoral candidate at the University of the Bundeswehr in Munich and an expert on AI for defense. We appreciate you all joining us today. Thomas, I want to start with you. The war of the future seems to be upon us. What has changed over the past 4 years?
Well, we have much more interconnected armed systems. We have new means of surveillance. We have the so-called kill chain, the sensor-to-shooter loop, which has accelerated dramatically. So we have a battlefield which is much more open to everyone who has the technical possibilities to exploit it.
Vanessa, would you say that what we're witnessing is a revolution in warfare?
I wouldn't necessarily say this is a revolution in military affairs, as is discussed in academic circles. This is rather applicable to something like nuclear weapons. That was indeed a real game changer for strategic military efforts. But what we're seeing is certainly a transformation or an acceleration of already existing processes. So making the kill chain way faster, decision-making faster, and that's what's currently going on.
Mm-hmm. Thomas, we haven't seen significant advances on either side on the battlefield in a long time. Do you think the use of new technologies is in part to blame for that kind of entrenchment we're seeing?
Well, I'm not sure. We have different developments on both sides. When we look to Ukraine, we have Ukraine which is developing new systems pretty fast. Russia, which is adopting also pretty fast, but still lagging behind, as we might hear. But the point is, everything is speeding up in a way that the human as a control mechanism, the meaningful human control has to remain in a way that we can still talk of a man is running the battlefield, not robots.
Mm-hmm. Roman, you just returned from the Kyiv Security Forum, a huge international presence there. Did you get the sense on your visit that Ukraine's position is shifting in a way from a country that is pleading for assistance to one that actually has a lot to bring to the table and wants to offer it on the international stage to its allies?
Exactly. It's a watershed moment for Ukraine, but also for the world, for NATO, for Germany as well. And it started, I would say, a few weeks ago when during the war, which is still ongoing between the United States, Israel and Iran, Ukraine has offered its expertise to the United States, but also to the countries of the Persian Gulf. And it was something unexpected. It brought the Ukrainian know-how in the center of the debate. Ukraine could show that it could be a security provider. And this is a completely new development. And speaking about what has changed in the past year or two, I would say the most significant change for me is the deep strike capabilities that Ukraine has developed. We are seeing now daily attacks on Russian oil infrastructure, oil refineries, deep inside Russia, up to 2,000 kilometers and more. And in the coming days, Russia will be celebrating the Victory Day on the 9th of May, a victory over Nazi Germany. And for the first time in years, there will be no military parade. It would be a very reduced parade, no military, no tanks, no missiles on display, something Russia has been very proud of. And most important thing is mobile internet will be switched off in Moscow because Russia is fearing Ukrainian drones. And this is something completely new. It changes how the war is perceived inside Russia.
We want to look at how Ukraine got there because none of what Ukraine is doing is science fiction. It's a highly efficient mix of cheap drones, data analytics, electronic warfare, robotics, and classic artillery, right? And yet they are completely upending the game. Let's take a look.
Surrounded by the latest domestically produced weapon systems, the Ukrainian president is on Telegram praising his soldiers' achievements. The future is at the front line, and Ukraine is building it, our robotic systems. For the first time in the history of this war, an enemy position was captured entirely by unmanned systems, ground robots and drones. Using AI and robotic systems on land, in the water and air, Ukraine is speeding up the so-called kill chain, the process of locating and engaging the enemy. It has helped the country shed its disadvantaged position in the 4-year war of attrition and inflict notable losses on Russia. For example, through attacks on the Russian oil industry. Out of necessity, a key industry emerged. The Ukrainians' new motto is, let the robots do the fighting, because they don't bleed. But Russia is advancing its own drone warfare and AI-guided systems, training young students to operate and oversee them. Is this the start of a race toward automated killing in Ukraine and around the world?
A lot of food for thought in this. Vanessa, I want to get the definition straight before we continue talking about this very complex topic, because what Ukraine is using are not fully autonomous weapons, are they?
Exactly. Mostly we're talking about drones, and they are usually actually controlled by human beings. When we talk about autonomous weapon systems, we actually work in the selecting and engaging process of targeting without human intervention. That's the very definition of autonomous weapon systems, or even better to call them autonomy in weapon systems, because sometimes you can switch it on, you can switch it off, you cannot see it. It can be on the land, in the water, in the sky. You don't know what an autonomous weapon system actually is. It is everywhere. It will be everywhere. That's why it's better to talk about autonomy as a scale.
Thomas, how important is it to keep the human in the loop?
Well, the human in the loop is, Vanessa has probably more to say on this, is a description which is not really what we are talking about these days. We are talking about meaningful human control. That means that somehow humans are involved in decision-making, in designing the decision-making and in the final outcome, but not necessarily, and that's changing a bit, not necessarily all the time in the loop. The reason is we are talking about speeding up the decision-making, speeding up the kill chain. And when we have a situation where humans are just not fast enough to come to a decision, we have this for years with air defense systems. You have a clear sky and everything flying in is a target. This is happening for years already. You wouldn't call this artificial intelligence. It's just, in a way, autonomous reaction. And the problem will be, how can we make sure that humans are still controlling the whole thing? Is the main point to speed it up, to the main point speed, or are we willing to concede that humans have to say the final word?
Yeah, I want to get to regulation in a second, but first I want to zoom in with you, Roman, on the case of Ukraine in particular, because Volodymyr Zelensky is saying that all these technological advances have helped save tens of thousands of lives. As far as you know about this topic, is war really becoming less dangerous, or are the risks just being shifted?
Well, I wouldn't say it is becoming less dangerous, but indeed it is helping to save lives, not because you engage in a different way with the enemy, but also because you have new opportunities to save lives by, for example, providing munition, food, or medical supplies to soldiers who cannot be reached in a classical way, let's say. You cannot say send a tank or a evacuation vehicle to certain positions because they most likely will be destroyed and people will be killed. So Ukrainians and Russians as well are sending drones to support the troops in certain positions. And this is something completely new. And it is developing. And what is very, very important, I think, are the ground systems, unmanned ground vehicles. And this is also something that Germany would like to learn from Ukraine. I've been on a roundtable, German-Ukrainian roundtable in the defense ministry just a few days ago. And this is what they were talking about as well. So they just not only are learning how to operate drones, how to protect from drone attacks, but also how to use those unmanned ground systems and integrate them in the whole system of Bundeswehr that is already there.
Yeah. Now, Ukraine pushed these innovations, being very creative, out of a position of necessity. It was always about survival for them, right? Where does Russia stand when it comes to using these new technologies?
Russia has been lagging behind from the very beginning because when this large-scale war started in 2022, Ukraine had only a few drones, some of them Turkish drones, and it used them in a way that Russia has not expected. Then Ukraine scaled up and Russia tried to catch up. So at the moment, there was a period, I would say maybe last year, when it looked like there was a balance between Ukrainian and Russian drone capabilities. Now it looks like Ukraine is moving forward and Russia is not able to protect its territory. And I think it's important also to understand what's going on when we are talking about deep strike capabilities or mid-strike capabilities that Ukraine has developed. It is something that Ukraine has developed itself because the Western countries were reluctant to allow Ukraine to use cruise missiles. Germany didn't give a green light to provide Taurus cruise missiles to Ukraine. The British and the French were more bold, I would say, in that regard. But Ukraine was forced, as you say. It didn't choose it to be this way. So it had to develop fast, and it was successful.
Vanessa, I want to talk about regulation when it comes to autonomy in weapons, because there is no real consensus on how to go about this. How big are the dangers, in your opinion, of technology advancing at a faster pace than efforts to actually create a framework that will be binding for all those who use them?
I mean, generally speaking, you usually first develop a system, a technology, and afterwards you regulate it. In this case, it might be a bit difficult to do so. Why? Because AI is actually a very new capability that might have very consequential outcomes. And when it comes to some legal questions, it is a bit unanswered who is actually responsible if something goes wrong. For instance, a war crime is committed by a machine where a human being would say, oh no, this wasn't my decision, I didn't do this, I didn't want this to take place. We always need intent. What happens if this intent is not given? And therefore, we are talking on the international level already for 10 years about these developing technologies, but now we see them on the battlefield. So I'm afraid this will actually not take place as a legally binding instrument. That's why every national army needs to think of own frameworks, how to develop trustworthy AI models, and the German Bundeswehr should certainly do so as well.
A short remark, if I may. In Ukraine, there is a system that when you attack with a drone, and you will get a reward for that. So the government provides the units that are using drones with additional drones or munition or whatever. So there is a whole system based on that. And that is why in most cases when Ukraine attacks, there is not just a team that is attacking, but also a team or part of the team that is just watching. So there's always a second or a third drone only with the camera to prove what is going on. And only when you have a video footage showing what happened, then you get a reward for that in the Ukrainian army. So what I mean is there are several drones, not just an attack drone, but also a surveillance drone, which is also could be used as a source to prove if something went wrong. I mean, if there was a wrong target or civilians were killed, there is always the chance to watch the footage from the surveillance drone.
Yeah. Thomas, wouldn't any kind of regulation or best practice be futile if we're looking at the bullies of this world having decided very openly to not play by the rules?
That's the question. My fear is that major players like the United States are exactly going in that direction, like the Chinese won't play by the rules anyway, so why should we? And add to this a warrior ethos that the war minister in the US displays. So, but what Vanessa said, national regulations, or maybe even on the EU level or on a European NATO level, would mean that certain states would be commit to have a ethical, responsible regulation, and I think that's the main point. If we look at other systems which have been banned, like anti-personnel mines, there is a convention, and we have that the Ukraine exited this this commitment. So you might always have the problem that in times of war, people start to say, well, we can't afford to play by the rules, but at least we have to try.
Yeah. That's one of the lessons that the war in Ukraine taught us. There are many more, and that is not just we need more drones. The modern military has to be on its toes, learn fast, procure fast, and train fast. For many armed forces, that means profound transformation, and Germany is no exception. That's why, for the first time, the Bundeswehr now has a military strategy.
After years of decline, the Bundeswehr is now being rebuilt with major funding and a new strategy, supported in part by Ukraine. We will also have our soldiers trained by Ukrainian personnel, and in essence, we are receiving data from the Ukrainians that they collect on the battlefield for the deployment of our systems, but also for data-based combat management. Ukraine is no longer just seeking help. It now has something to teach Germany, for example, data-driven battlefield operations. The Bundeswehr is still poorly positioned in this area, and to address that, the two defense ministers recently signed a comprehensive agreement. A glimpse into the future was offered at the opening of the Bundeswehr's new Innovation Center. Its mission is to secure an information edge on the battlefield, embracing more AI and cutting back on bureaucracy. Paper-bound soldiers are meant to become modern, digitally networked fighters. How prepared is the Bundeswehr for the future in the age of AI?
I'll pass that question right on to you, Thomas. How prepared is the Bundeswehr for the future?
We're trying to catch up, and I think they are a bit farther than we all see in public. We have to keep in mind for the last 1 or 2 years, they have been pretty reluctant in displaying or even telling what new capabilities they acquired. So it's not fast enough maybe, but it's going on. If you see, they started to acquire loitering munition, which is a kind of attack drone, and they ordered tens of thousands, but those tens of thousands of drones won't be delivered immediately. They will stay with the companies who produce them, and they will be delivered with updated software when needed. That's one of the steps they need to take.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned software, Vanessa. A lot of that comes from the United States, especially when we're talking about artificial intelligence. And some of the companies who provide them are not without controversy. The CEO of Palantir recently published a manifesto, and I think we've probably all read it, talking about how Silicon Valley owes a moral debt to the United States. He talked about cultural hierarchy among countries. What are the pitfalls in building a country's defense structures around these companies' products, and what does it mean for Germany's military sovereignty?
Honestly, there is no other way than relying on private companies when it comes to innovation, because most inventions are actually built on the civilian places and then later introduced in the military, as we can see now with those very cheap drones, right? They were not developed for military purposes in the first place. So when we want to have cutting-edge technologies and products, as Thomas mentioned, then we need to rely on those companies who can actually deliver right now and not at any time in the future. But at the same time, this creates risks. So for us in a German-European context, it might be wise to rely on European data where we have more protection and to use our own systems, including Ukraine, obviously. That might be a bit lesson from this war, not to be dependent on players that might want to take away their products, their users, as happened, for instance, with Starlink. I mean, Ukraine was very dependent on Starlink. And if Elon Musk decided not to give these data anymore to the Ukrainian armed forces, we're really lagging behind. And that's one lesson we should take into account.
I have to add something at this point. Vice Admiral Thomas Daum, the head of the Bundeswehr cyber branch, the youngest branch of the military service, just yesterday, I think, told newspaper reporters that Germany, the German armed forces, wouldn't use Palantir because he said we are not ready to hand over our trove of national data to this company. So we'll see whether he can stand with this decision. It's a difference, for instance, with German police authorities.
They're using it already in many states.
They're using it. So the German military doesn't want to use it. We'll see what comes out of it.
There's a lot of discussion here in Germany and around the globe, I believe, about especially actors like Palantir. Ukraine didn't have time for that. Do you think that is part of what led to their success, that, you know, there wasn't much time to discuss, to think, they just had to act?
Of course. I think it also, when we speak about learning from Ukraine here in Germany, my guess is that German defense industry was very reluctant at the beginning of the war to engage in partnership with Ukrainian enterprises or Ukrainian defense industry, because maybe it was thinking, who knows what will happen next? It's a country at war. Can we trust them? Will there be Ukraine in a year or two? There were voices like that as well. But things have changed dramatically. So now we are seeing just German-Ukrainian joint ventures producing drones, but I think this will scale up in the coming years because Ukraine has the knowledge, it has the people that can develop modern weapon systems, and Germany needs them. And when Germany says, or countries like Germany say, we would like to not just be dependent on the United States, or we need to integrate more with countries like Ukraine, so outside of European Union. But Ukraine is on the way to the European Union, so this was also something that would accelerate that cooperation, I think.
What would you say is the single biggest lesson Germany can learn from Ukraine?
Be fast.
Be fast. All right. We're trying to be very fast, Vanessa, but in this brave new world where we're employing technology that reduces the cost of war, whether it be the human cost or the material cost, aren't we also lowering the threshold for armed conflict?
To a certain extent, yes, because it will become easier if you don't risk the life of soldiers by only sending drones, for instance, to the enemy's territory. So it might seem to be less of a risk why the threshold could be lowered. On the other hand, you know that these wars can escalate very quickly. So even if you begin only a so-called small war on your borders, it might reach to big consequences. So it's still not wise to use technologies for a lower threshold, because eventually you might risk a full-scale war that you did not intend.
Mm-hmm. Thomas, Roman says that the biggest lesson is to be fast. Can the Bundeswehr do that?
Well, at least I can give it a try. They have to come some obstacles, administrative type obstacles. We have the problem with reservists who are willing to join, or former soldiers who are willing to rejoin and never get an answer from the administration and things like that. And we have another situation which is completely different from Ukraine. Germany is a country at peace. So all laws, all regulations are peacetime regulations. While in Ukraine, you can come to decisions fast because you overrule certain things. In times of war, you can't do this in Germany. One simple example is the electromagnetic spectrum. Yeah. You can use for drones, you can use other frequencies. You can't in Germany because your grandma can't watch TV anymore.
Yeah. Roman, last question briefly to you. Do all these technologies ultimately make us safer or just better at killing each other?
They do make us safer, and we should be more bold in deploying them, employing them, and learning from those who can.
Thank you all. That's all the time we have today. I want to thank all our panelists in this discussion, and you, of course, for watching. I hope you enjoyed our program. From all of us here on To The Point, thank you so much for your company, and join us again next week. Bye-bye.